The last thing I'm going to talk about is analysis and assessment of my results. My program took 410,000 cycles to run, and 286,000 of these cycles were multiplies. So like I was saying before, in my hardware simulator, the multiply was a single cycle operation, and this isn't realistic, and this is where I'm accounting for that. So based on this paper here, where they're claiming that modular multiplication can be done in n cycles, where n is the number of bits, I'm saying that multiplication takes 32 cycles, and so I've accounted for one of those cycles already, so I need to add 31 cycles for each multiplication, and that's included in this number here. So I think this design could be adapted pretty well to other encryption algorithms, and I say that because adding a multiplier wasn't especially difficult. So as long as another encryption algorithm sort of relied on bitwise operations and maybe one other mathematical operation, I think this design would be pretty flexible and could support those algorithms. Some of the problems I ran into along the way, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out which of the available designs to use as a starting point. I looked a lot at this one called the rocket chip, and that one I eventually realized it was just too much detail. They simulate DRAM, and so just the learning curve was pretty steep there, so I gave up on that one and moved on to looking at the 5-stage version of this processor, and I came pretty close to getting that one to work, but I started to run into problems with the memory. So it would run part of my program, but it would never update the loop counter, so it would just loop forever. So I didn't get that I wasn't able to get that to work, so I switched to looking at the 3-stage processor, and that was about a week ago I made that switch. Another issue was that the C++ simulator wasn't especially friendly or easy to use. Just so like modifying the hardware and then regenerating the simulator and trying to observe and to understand the effect that those changes had, that was kind of painstaking. So at times I did wonder if Verilog would have been easier, but yeah, I just stuck with C++. Some of the things, some of the directions I would go in if I had more time. I think the first thing would be to pipeline the multiplier. So, I mean, the IDEA algorithm has at least 2 multiplies that could be going on in parallel, so that's kind of an obvious one. Another option would be to just add entirely separate execution pipelines. So in other words, you could be encrypting the first 8 bytes in one pipeline and the next 8 bytes in another pipeline, and so on. And you could expand that in parallel for as much as the resources would allow. I mean, none of the blocks are dependent on each other, so it's pretty parallelizable. But unfortunately, I didn't get as far along in these directions as I'd hoped. Basically, getting the simulator to work, getting the compiler to work. I guess another issue I forgot to mention was that originally the compiler was putting out a lot of shift operations, and that was related to I was using a lot of half words, so I sort of switched everything to 32-bit words just to get around that. So there's sort of a lot of details that slowed me down, but overall I don't regret the approach that I took. I wanted to look at alternatives to the standard Verilog workflow, and I'm optimistic that that there's something here. So I'm going to keep my eye on this stuff, and that's about it. Thank you.